Hello, welcome back, Zach. This is your favorite grandfather too. I say that for one reason. Why do I say your favorite grandfather? Well, your mother's father died some time ago, so I'm your only remaining grandfather. So therefore, I'm your favorite grandfather. I have a nephew who calls me his favorite uncle. That's on his father's side. Why? Because I'm his only uncle. So I only have one brother. My brother only has one. That means my nephew only has one uncle in his father's line. So last time I talked briefly about a man called Jorden Peterson. And for me, he's a comparatively young man. He's 56 years old right now. Maybe 57. I'm not sure if he had a birthday. And I'll give you a very brief background. He was born and raised in Alberta, a place called Edmonton. And if you look at Canadian map, you'll see it's over in the western part. It's not one of the major places like British Columbia or Ottawa or Montreal or Toronto. So sort of in the countryside. I actually grew up in the countryside too. I was born in Muskegon, Michigan. If you look at the Michigan map, it's on the west coast of Michigan. And then when I was about 3 years old, I moved into a small town called Lamont, Lamont, a suburb of Grand Rapids. And my father worked in the city. It took him about roughly 30 minutes to drive from the village. It was a village. He only had 2 lanes, one lane going one way and one lane going out of the boulevard. No traffic lights, no big cars, no discos, none of that stuff. It was village living. And I want to make my point here. I think for a young kid in elementary school, one of the best places to live is in a country village. Now that's very difficult nowadays because people work in the cities. So you probably lived in a lot of apartments. Well, you do what you have to do. But then we moved to a suburb for about 6 years, 6 years, and then I graduated high school, went into the Air Force. Now, I can understand Jorden Peterson growing up in Edmonton, which is a sort of a country city. It's actually quite a popular city, but it's full of a lot of snow. Very popular in Western Canada, in a province called Alberta. Now, Peterson eventually moved to the University of Ottawa, and he got his first degree there. It might be University of Toronto, I forget. I'm sorry, University of Toronto, I think. And then he decided to study a lot of stuff. But before he studied it, he had a gap year after he graduated from the university. And I mentioned that briefly before. Gap year is very important if you have not decided what you want to do. And as I mentioned before, gap year means you take some time off and you leave the university and do something. So he spent about a year in Europe. And he was interested in a lot of different things, but basically psychology. His first degree was political science. He got a bachelor's degree in political science, and he spent a year in Europe thinking and doing a lot of studying, and he went back and got another degree in psychology. And then eventually went into graduate school at McGill University and got his PhD in psychology. And then eventually moved on to Harvard, became a professor at Harvard for about 5 years. And then he moved back to Canada, and he was at the University of Toronto in the psychology department. A few years ago, he became quite popular with a lot of people. And he had some YouTube videos. And I would suggest to you, if you're interested in him, and I highly recommend him because he has some very unconventional thoughts, very creative thoughts, that you look at Jorden Peterson on YouTube with a lot of different things. And about 2 years ago, he became very controversial because he was giving ideas that were a little bit outside the academy. And now he is considered very, very creative. He had a book, his first book described the structure of systems of belief and myths. I repeat that. He described structure of systems of beliefs and myths. And then he talked about their role in regulating emotion. And then he was interested in the creation of meaning. meaning, excuse me. And then he was talking about motivation. Then he had a second book, which has become a bestseller called 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. And so he made the videos, as I said, and he was criticizing political correctness. And he was criticizing a Canadian bill that talked about gender identity was a prohibited manner of discrimination. And one of the things he objected to is the Canadian government was telling him how to use pronouns. Pronouns are he, she, and it. And then you have a lot of other stuff, like they and them, etc. And he basically reacted against the Canadian government. He said the Canadian government was wrong. Now, in the world now, there are many, many governments. And sometimes the governments are correct, and sometimes the governments are wrong. And it is a person's duty to point out to the government when they're wrong. But again, you have a lot of disagreement about that between different people. So you always have one person says A, and another person says B, and another one says C, and maybe another one says D. Now, this actually is good. Why is this good? Because then you have what you call a discussion, or if it's more formalized, it's debate. And then you're looking at your ideas and you're looking at other people's ideas. Because not everybody is correct every time. And you learn stuff. You learn stuff basically about what you think and feel and what you hear about other people thinking and feeling. And this is called a community. And if you're in the academic world, it's called basically the academic community, where you have a lot of different ideas. This goes back to what I talked about with science fiction. Science fiction is one of the most important genre of literature that you can look at, because it's full of alternative ideas, alternative ways of living. And that's important too, because when you travel, even if it's inside a country like the US, which is very, very large and a lot of different regions with different people thinking different things, you learn stuff. And you learn stuff from yourself and you learn stuff from them. But you're looking at alternative ways of thinking. And the key word here is thinking. And then you have another word which is creativity. You create stuff. Now, what is considered the highest level of creation, generally? Of creativity, I should say. Creativity's highest level is generally considered to be in art. In art. And so people look at art and they look at how other people create all kinds of things. And if you're interested in art, there's a lot of art books around which are very interesting. They have two words, two things. One is pictures, and the other is writing. And you look at the pictures and you feel and think something, and then you read the explanation. So art is considered to be probably the most creative part of life. And artists have a lot of freedom to think because people like to see differences. And so if you look in art, you'll see the difference way back centuries ago with medieval art. And then it moves up and then you have a lot of stuff. And then you come into modern art. But art is interesting. Another part of thinking, this is beyond university now. The university simply is a place to get certification, to get a job or something. You have to get a bachelor's degree or master's degree or something like that. For example, if you're in high school, the basic thing you want to do is graduate from high school to get a diploma from high school. It means you're a high school graduate. You've passed through the system. So, you have academic learning and you have your personal learning. And personal learning is important, but you've got to base it on the foundation of academic learning. And so when you think about things, and sometimes you might want to write down your ideas, you might keep a diary. And I would recommend that to you if you're really interested in that. You keep a diary of your thoughts. And you can also take some photographs or pictures and clip out stuff from magazines and put them in a little book and keep several books that you keep of what you think at certain times in your life. Because the whole point again is it's your life and you try to develop yourself as much as possible. I think we cut it right there.